From its origins to its tilt to the effects of its atmosphere and more, join me as we explore the Uranus discovery and why it's such an oddity. While it's true that technology nowadays allows us to view planets and stars with incredible clarity, you might be surprised by how far back many of our planets were discovered. For Uranus, it was officially discovered all the way back in 1781 by Sir William Herschel. And if you're curious, the reason he was knighted, which is why he's called Sir, is because of the fact that he discovered the planet. The catch, though, was that the sighting of the planet was not believed to be a planet by Herschel. Instead, he thought it was a comet, and thus ignored for the grand part of the next bit of time. However, despite this belief that it was a comet, he recorded it in a great many places, including telling about his discovery to the Royal Society. The power I had on when I first saw the comet was 227. From experience, I know that the diameter of the fixed stars are not proportionally magnified with higher powers, as planets are. Therefore, I now put the powers at 460 and 932, and found that the diameter of the comet increased in proportion to the power, as it ought to be, on the supposition of it not being a fixed star, while the diameters of the stars to which I compared it were not increased in the same ratio. Moreover, the comet, being magnified much beyond what its light would admit of, appeared hazy and ill-defined with these great powers, while the stars preserved that luster and distinctness which from many thousand observations I knew they would retain. The sequel has shown that my surmises were well-founded, this proving to be the comet we have lately observed. His wonder about the object continued to plague him. Herschel notified the astronomer Royal Neville Maskelyne of his discovery and received this flummoxed reply from him on 23rd of April, 1781. I don't know what to call it. It is as likely to be a regular planet moving in an orbit nearly circular to the Sun as a comet moving in a very eccentric ellipsis. I have not yet seen any comma or tail to it. It wasn't until years later that others saw Uranus and confirmed it was indeed a planet, to which Herschel was more than happy to accept credit for his find. And get this, he was paid 200 euros as a stipend for the discovery, but the man who gave it to him, King George III, asked that he move to Windsor so that the royal family could observe the planet that he had found. Now here's another twist in this tale. When the planet was confirmed to be real, Herschel wanted to name it Georgian Sidus, which is a reference to King George III. He even went into great detail about why it should be named as thus. In the fabulous ages of ancient times, the appellations of Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn were given to the planets, as being the names of their principal heroes and divinities. In the present, more philosophical era, it would hardly be allowable to have recourse to the same method and call it Juno, Pallas, Apollo, or Minerva, for a name to our new heavenly body. The first consideration of any particular event or remarkable incident seems to be its chronology. If in any future age it should be asked when this last found planet was discovered, it would be a very satisfactory answer to say, in the reign of King George III. Sounds reasonable on paper, but the problem with naming it after a ruler versus a god deity is that most people have certain feelings about rulers and rarely about deities outside their own pantheon. Thus, while people in Britain were okay with naming the planet after their king, the rest of the world wasn't. So instead, the planet was named Uranus by Johann Bode, who named it after the Greek god Uranus. He believed that if we named the planet something other than a deity, it would feel out of place, and it fit the order of Mars to Jupiter. Mars was the son of Jupiter, and Jupiter was the son of Saturn, and Saturn would be the son of Uranus, thus adding a nice bit of storytelling and balance to things. It took a while for the name to stick, but in 1850, the HM Nautical Almanac Office was the last official place to go from Georgium Sidus to Uranus. And if you're curious, yes, the same man who named Uranus also got uranium named after his idea. Oh, the wonders of the world and how they work. You almost have to wonder what would have happened differently history-wise if Herschel realized that it was a planet and not a comet in 1781. Would the name have stuck? Would the jokes not have happened? Ought to wonder, what if? Regardless though, it's impressive that we were able to discover and recognize planets at a distance through very basic technology all the way back in 1781. Could you imagine what it would have been like for them to have some of our technology and use it to observe them back then? it would have changed history in more ways than one, you could be sure of that. But here's the thing, while it's true the events we just laid out for you, there is still some big debates about whether Herschel was really the first person to discover Uranus. Note that we said earlier that it was officially discovered back in 1781, but there are some who feel that some of the older cultures in the world might have had an eye on it before him. For example, there are many who believe that the ancient Babylonians knew of at least the planets from Mercury to Saturn during their reign and their own technologies. But going back even further than them, the Greeks were said to have found it quite a bit before Herschel. Ancient records seem to indicate that a Greek astronomer, Hipparchus, noted the planet in the 2nd century BC. However, he recorded it as a star, not a planet. You may have heard his name before. He was not only an astronomer, but also the founder of trigonometry, so clearly he was a busy guy. And it's also ironic that, like Herschel, he thought it was something other than a planet. Another reliable discovery of the planet was made by English astronomer John Flamsteed in 1690. He, like Hipparchus, also misidentified it as a star and cataloged it in the Taurus constellation, which is weird since that would mean that he thought Uranus was much farther away than it is, because the Taurus constellation at its closest is 400 light-years away from Earth. That's a really big distance if you didn't know. Anyway, there are more findings and misrepresentations of what Uranus was and wasn't throughout the years, which makes it all the more important that Herschel, eventually, was able to get it confirmed to be a planet. However, one of the most important things about the planet wasn't discovered until much later: its rings. You see, for the longest time, a lot of people in the world believed that Saturn, and only Saturn, was the planet that had rings, mainly because its rings were more visible and bigger, which allowed them to be spotted much more easily in the telescopes of the time. However, this assumption was smashed when in 1977, an astronomical team under James L. Elliott, Edward W. Dunham, and Douglas J. Make first spotted them. So that means for almost 200 years, based on the official acknowledgement of the planet, we thought it was a ringless planet. Today, we now know there are in fact 10 to 13 distinct rings around the planet. They start at around a distance of 38,000 kilometers from the planet's center and extend out to around 98,000 kilometers. They're not as big as Saturn's rings, which are about 282,000 kilometers across, but they're still very impressive. And yet, that still wasn't the only discovery about Uranus left to be made. After all, don't you remember Schoolhouse Rock when they sang about Uranus? Don't you remember what Uranus was built on? Without a doubt, the most mysterious and strange thing about Uranus as a whole is the fact that it's positioned on its side, which is something that no other planet in our solar system is like. Some have tilts like Saturn, but never a full tilt like Uranus did. It's 98 degrees relative to the Sun. If you want to compare that to the Earth, our tilt is only 23.5 degrees. This gives off a pretty interesting effect to those who look at it from afar, not the least of which is because its rings are now vertical in orientation and not horizontal like the other planets that have rings in our solar system. But that's not all. Unlike every other planet in the solar system, Uranus doesn't spin in place as it goes around the Sun. Rather, it rolls because of the angle of its tilt. Seeing it in time-lapse makes it feel very different from the other planets, which it is, but still. So what is it that caused Uranus to have such a funny tilt? The biggest theory is that a long time ago something collided with the planet, not unlike the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. But when this entity collided with Uranus, it quite literally moved the planet's axis and poles, causing the sideways planet as a result. And because of this, the south pole of Uranus is always facing the Sun, while the north pole is pointed towards the darkness of space. What's more, the seasons of the planet? They last 20 years, so that's one pole that has constant exposure to the Sun, and the other that has no sunlight at all for 20 years. There's a wrinkle, though, to the collision theory, mainly in that Uranus's moons, of which there are 27, have a very similar tilt to it, which should be impossible unless Uranus directly affected that in a way that isn't easily explained. So now the theory is that Uranus has had two collisions in its history, which set it both and its moons in the places that they are now. That's quite a collision, don't you think? Think that's enough oddities for one planet? No, it's got a few more. You'd think that Neptune or Pluto would be the coldest planet in the solar system, but they are not. Uranus is. Just in the clouds that make up the atmosphere, the average temperature on Uranus is about minus 243 degrees Fahrenheit, but it can also go as low as minus 370 degrees Fahrenheit. That's really cold. But why is this the case? Why is Uranus so much colder than Neptune, despite the fact that it's closer to the Sun? That's because of its makeup. Mainly, while many of the other planets in our solar system have a core that emits a lot of heat, Uranus doesn't. So by that token, while it does get heat from the Sun, it doesn't emit as much as the other planets. Even Neptune emits more heat than Uranus, and it's much farther from the Sun than its twin. Uranus is the only giant planet that is not giving off significantly more heat than it is receiving from the Sun. And we don't know why that is, says Mark Hofstadter, a planetary scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The big question is whether that heat is trapped on the inside, and so the interior is much hotter than we expect right now, Hofstadter says. Or did something happen in its history that let all the internal heat get released much more quickly than expected? The mystery hasn't been solved yet, but the result remains the same. It's cold, thus adding another reason why we don't colonize it. Not that we could before, but it's nice to know another reason to avoid it. Although because of the atmosphere and the pressure of the planet, there is one more oddity that needs to be talked about. It rains diamonds. Oh sure, now you're interested in going to Uranus. Bunch of greedy viewers. Jokes aside, this is a true fact about Uranus. It honestly does rain diamonds, and how it does is both fascinating and scary, because as we noted earlier, the upper atmosphere of Uranus is very cold, and thus it rains. But as the rains go down towards the planet itself, the temperature rises really fast. So because of this, the ice melts, and when it continues to draw closer to the surface, the pressure of the planet begins to exert itself. The result? Diamonds. And not just regular diamonds. Diamonds the size of grizzly bears. Ones that are said to be millions of carats apiece. I hope I don't have to state why we haven't tried to get those diamonds for ourselves, as anything we'd make would either be frozen, burned, or crushed the moment it gets within the atmosphere of Uranus. Still, it is a fun picture to think of. A planet literally covered in diamonds because it keeps raining them down. Bet you wish this kind of thing happened on Earth, huh? Ironically though, it's not just Uranus that rains diamonds. Neptune technically does it too. Maybe that's why they're twins.